Can you imagine going through one of the most terrifying and physically harmful experiences of your life, only to be left at the hospital alone while your spouse goes home to drink themselves to sleep and then go to work the next day? That's exactly what happened to the person who's asking the first question for today's episode, and understandably, they're harboring some resentment and pain based on that. This is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff, and in this episode, I'm going to try to help this person see if their relationship is salvageable, or whether that feeling of abandonment and the pain that's lingering is pointing to a bigger underlying issue with their marriage. We'll also dive into a discussion about whether they might have a brain injury from the traumatic event and how they can go about getting evaluated for that. In the second question, I have somebody who simply cannot stop checking their phone no matter what they try. They can hold a conversation with somebody without their phone, and they don't have notifications turned on, but as soon as they're by themselves, they're checking their apps several times per minute. Something I'm sure a lot of us can relate to. So I think that you will be really interested and benefit a lot from the advice that I give. So be sure to subscribe wherever you watch or listen. If you have a question for the show or a topic suggestion, send me an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com. And with that said, let's jump into it. Okay, the first question asks, "Hi there. I've recently started listening to your podcast. I'm struggling with PTSD, depression, and anxiety. The PTSD is relatively new. I was in a car accident almost 6 years ago that caused me to black out, and I woke up with a broken back. My husband wasn't very supportive during that time, and I felt abandoned. The night of the accident, he went home, got drunk, and went to work the next day. I'm having a hard time forgiving him for how he responded to my accident and the lack of care he gave me the months following it. I asked him a couple of years ago to separate, but he didn't want to. Now I'm ready to ask him again, but I'm scared. I don't know who I am anymore, and I want to focus on getting to know the new me. I think I have a brain injury from the accident, but I'm not sure. I just know I'm not who I used to be. Where do I even start? Thank you for all you're doing and reading this. Much love." So, hey, thank you so much for listening to the show. I really, really appreciate your attention. And I'm sorry to hear about the accident that you went through and how it's impacted your life. It's super unfair when something like this happens, and I wish that it didn't have to happen to you. But, here we are. There are a few sub-questions in what you asked, so I'm going to try to address each of them in turn. I'll start with the end of your question. You mentioned that you think you may have a brain injury from the accident, but you're not sure. Brain injuries are definitely a somewhat common occurrence in car accidents, and there are various types of brain injuries. Obviously, we can imagine that if you hit your head on a steering wheel or a windshield or even the pavement, if you fly out of the car, you might hurt your brain in the area that made contact. That's pretty logical. However, you can also get something that's called a coup contre coup injury. This is spelled strangely. I think it's from French. So COUP and then dash contre, CONTRE, and then COUP again. Coup contre coup injury. And what this means is basically our brains are not solid. They're actually quite jelly-like in consistency. They wobble around quite a bit in our skulls. So when we're traveling through space and something stops our body, our brain tries to keep going. And so then that collides with the inside of our skull. Very much like what happens to your body if you're in a car. If you're in a car and you're not wearing a seatbelt, somebody slams on the brakes, car stops, your body keeps going, so you crumple to the front of it, right? That happens to your brain inside your skull as well. And that's called a concussion. But that's not all. You get 2 injuries for the price of 1. So the brain can rebound off the part of your skull that it initially hit and then bounce back far enough that it also hits the other side of your skull. So, for example, if you have somebody that hit the front of their head in a car accident, you might logically have damage to the frontal lobe, but as the brain rebounds and hits the other side of the skull, that might also cause damage to the occipital lobe, which is in the back of the brain. And you can find really interesting scans of this. If you look online for a coup contre coup injury, you'll see dark spots on, 2 opposite sides of the brain, and it's because of that action that I'm talking about. And this kind of injury can also happen sometimes to a lesser extent just from whiplash. Even if you don't have a significant brain injury from hitting your head on something, just the back and forth movement can cause your brain to jiggle back and forth. And unfortunately, in our skulls, especially around like our sinus cavity and in the back, we do have these spiny projections that the brain can latch onto and damage itself. Another kind of brain injury would be what are called shearing injuries. And this is basically where there's no notable overall brain damage you would see on a brain scan, But the connections in the brain, the neurons and how they're connected, those get disrupted because of that sort of jiggling that happens in the brain. And that basically just leads to a decreased efficiency in your thinking. And then finally, you can have post-concussion syndrome, which is a general term for a lot of different symptoms that can happen after a concussion. Like sometimes you get mood swings or fatigue, difficulty with balance, dizziness. You can have nausea. You can have sensitivity to light. Lots of different symptoms, and they typically clear up over time, but it's something that can happen after a mild brain injury, which is what we would call a concussion. Now, from your question itself, I'm not sure what has you thinking about whether you've suffered a brain injury, but I think it's definitely worth taking seriously. The impact of brain injuries can vary widely since it depends on what part of the brain was impacted. It's most common for anybody who's been in a car accident where there's some degree of brain damage to experience a slowing down of the thought process, so a decrease in processing speed, and perhaps what you might refer to as brain fog, that feeling that thoughts are there, but it's just hard to find them, nothing's working quite the way it should be in your brain, and it's just hard. So that's a very common experience for any type of brain injury. But you can also have memory issues, you can have language disruption, you can have visual spatial problems, or even problems with your physical coordination. You can have loss of smell. Many different things can happen. If it's damage to the frontal lobes of the brain, like I was talking about in the example, you might also see behavior change, like uninhibited behavior, so making inappropriate statements that aren't really in line with the social situation, or rapid mood swings or personality changes. That can certainly happen. I saw a young man who had a frontal lobe brain injury from, I think it was skating or BMX riding. I don't think it was a car accident. Either way, it was very apparent in his behavior. He would, suddenly get up in the middle of the test and say, fuck this, I'm walking out. And he would walk out and then come back. So he had a lot of trouble controlling his behavior because of that damage to the frontal lobe. So if you're concerned about a potential brain injury, I think that you should bring it up to your doctor. They may want to order a brain scan, and they might potentially send you to a neurologist who's a specialist, a medical doctor that specializes in brain injuries and other disorders of the brain. And the purpose of this, actually looking into whether you've experienced a brain injury, is primarily for your own self-understanding and potentially to learn more about what it is you're contending with. It's 6 years after the event, and your brain has likely healed about as much as it's going to. That doesn't mean you can't continue to build skills and improve your cognitive or your physical abilities, but you're not going to see that same sort of rapid change that you see in the first year following an injury when your brain is literally healing itself. So talk to your doctor about it. Get checked out, and maybe you'll be lucky enough to see somebody like me, a neuropsychologist, who can put you through the wonderful torture that is cognitive assessment. So we'll see. Now, I want to address the relationship part of this that definitely deserves attention, but first let's take a quick sponsor break. This episode is brought to you by NoCD. Here's a question for you. How do you know when overthinking goes too far? Well, if you're constantly questioning and analyzing every interaction, if you're caught in an endless loop of what ifs, if you feel paralyzed by fears of what might happen, if it's eating up hours of your day and causing you a ton of stress, you might be dealing with more than overthinking. These experiences can be symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. Because the thing is, there's so much more to OCD than just hand washing or organizing. OCD can manifest in many ways, and sometimes it can be mistaken for anxiety or overthinking. That's because it can look like constant worry, intense fear, and stressful unwanted thoughts playing on repeat, no matter what physical or mental actions you take to make them go away. Understanding what OCD really looks like is important because there are so many misconceptions about the condition. So although OCD severely affects millions of people, they often don't even realize it. But if you're struggling with similar symptoms, there's hope, because OCD is highly treatable with the right kind of therapy. That means specialized therapy, because other forms of therapy won't work for OCD, even ones like talk therapy. That's why I want to tell you about NoCD. NoCD provides virtual therapy sessions with licensed therapists trained in specialized treatment designed specifically for OCD, exposure and response prevention therapy, or ERP. They accept many major insurance plans to help make it affordable and provide always-on support between therapy sessions. To learn more about therapy with NoCD, go to NoCD, NoCD.com and schedule a free 15-minute call with their team. That's NoCD.com to learn more and book a free 15-minute call. And as a bonus to you guys, I did a full interview with Patrick McGrath from NoCD. So he talks all about the ERP approach and how NoCD is unique. So check that out on episode 406 of the podcast. All right, let's get back to it. Okay, so getting into the relationship stuff. If I'm reading your question the right way, you were in a car accident that rendered you unconscious, and when you woke up, you realized you had a fractured vertebra or vertebrae. Then on the night of the accident, your husband left you at the hospital, went home, got drunk, and went to work the next day. Fuck that. Obviously, I'm seeing one side of the story here, but fuck that. I'm having a really hard time imagining a good reason for him to have done that. I'm wondering if some of the trauma that you're experiencing here is not only in relation to the actual accident, but also the feelings of abandonment and the fear that you had at that time due to just being alone for those moments. You know, everybody deals with things in their own ways, and it would be reasonable if this was just a mistake on his part. Like, for example, if it was just scary and potentially traumatic for him, and he lacked the coping skills to be a good partner to you at the time, and he self-destructed a little bit. I could see that being a possibility in some cases. I still wouldn't be happy about it if I were in your shoes, but it would at least provide some sort of explanation. But it sounds like this continued. It continued in the months following your injury, and he's not taken any accountability for it. Even further, you've asked for separation, which tells me there's some serious discord in the relationship and you're not getting what you need from it. That could be safety, happiness, companionship. You're not happy there. You're not getting what you need. And the fact that you asked for separation and he said he didn't want to concerns me very much. I don't know exactly what his response was, but if it was a hard no, like, no, we're not doing that, I won't do that, but then he also isn't willing to entertain any methods to improve the marriage, like communication, counseling, hearing you out about what was really difficult and what you were having a hard time forgiving him for. If all of that was true, I would really start thinking about, okay, are we experiencing abuse here? I'm not saying that's what's going on, but if those answers were yes, if those were things that he did, you might want to start looking into that. It sounds to me like you've wanted to get out of this relationship for a long while, but you're scared, and that's totally understandable. I have no idea how long you guys have been together, but it's obviously been over 6 years. I don't know how many years before that. Regardless, when you've been with somebody for a long time and you've built a marriage and a life together, the prospect of leaving can be scary, even when it's not under such severe circumstances. So that's normal and valid, but it doesn't mean that you should stay. Let me be clear. I don't know if you leaving is the best option here because I don't have a lot of context. This would be something for you to talk about with your family, with your closest friends, and your therapist to gain clarity about what you want and what you should do. If you do feel like your best option is to leave, it may not be through an amicable separation, right? He's made it clear that he does not want to do that. So I don't think you will be able to wait for him to give you permission to leave. I don't know that he will ever do that, given the way that he's treated you in the past. So that means you're going to want to look into your options, potentially start developing a plan, make sure that you ensure your own safety, those sorts of things, and then look into what you can do here. Do you need to pursue a divorce? Do you need to move out temporarily to be with somebody else that can care for you? Whatever it might be, you want to start thinking about that. And in the meantime, making sure that you have a support network of people that can be there for you will be super helpful. Again, this can be loved ones and professionals. A lot of areas have organizations that can help you with this sort of thing. If you're trying to figure out how can I go about getting a divorce from this person? How can I do it in a safe way that doesn't leave me vulnerable? There are organizations there. You just kind of Google in your area, a family justice center, family violence center, anything like that. Obviously, you're not talking about physical violence is happening in the relationship, but these might be starting places for you to look for the right organization. Underneath all of this, I hear a really strong motivation in you, which I want to make sure that I shout out. You want to learn more about who you are. You want to gain some mastery over your PTSD and your other psychiatric symptoms, and you want to continue pushing forward. And for that, I'm super proud of you. I want you to know that you're not being unreasonable or irrational for still feeling pain related to the abandonment. And you're not making a big deal about nothing. It sounds like you've been through some serious shit and you were treated horribly in the aftermath. That's the kind of thing that can definitely rupture a relationship and really stick with you over time. So I hope that these thoughts are helpful to you, both on the brain injury side, as well as just giving you the permission to accept that your instinct is right in the relationship, probably, and that there is a reason you've wanted separation, and some ideas on how to go about that. So I wish you the absolute best luck. Thank you. All right, and on to the second question. It reads, I feel like I live on my phone. Over the years, I think my phone has taken over. I find myself constantly checking my phone. I keep Do Not Disturb on basically all day, every day, because I hate getting notifications, but I find myself checking for notifications way too often. I also have a smartwatch that I find myself checking way too much. I use it for fitness purposes, so I don't want to not wear it. I made a New Year's resolution a few years ago to be present with people and not in my phone, which is stuck, but all other times are my problem. Every time I have no one around, or even while I'm working, I'm checking it multiple times, even down to once a minute. Phones seem to have everything you need right in your pocket and are a safety crutch of some kind. I don't have a pen and paper, boom, I have a phone. Forgot your wallet? Apple Pay. Everything is on it, but I can't seem to not let it run my life. I also hate carrying multiple things with me, even a purse is too much. It's always there with me, and I find myself on it all day, every day, and I hate it. In the time it took me to write this, I probably checked my notifications 5 times already. Any advice for not checking your phone all the time or just constantly being on it? Thanks so much. Thank you for this question. I know from personal and professional experience that you are not alone in this. It's really difficult. It's very difficult. Everybody has a different experience with their phone, but falling into a rabbit hole like this is not uncommon. If you have not yet, be sure to check out episode 401, where I interview Jenny Ketchum-Crooks all about this topic. Her story is basically that she missed her kid's first steps because she was looking down at her phone, and that prompted her to revolutionize the way that she is approaching technology. And she also made a 30-day guide to reducing digital consumption and focusing on maximizing real life, so to speak. So definitely check that out. And aside from that, I think I also have some thoughts and tips for you. You mentioned that your phone has turned into a kind of a safety crutch, and that's very true. We do rely on our phones for many, many things. I think one of your first steps might be writing down all of the assumptions that you have about your phone and your watch, all the assumptions that are holding you back from being away from it. Some of them may be fully supported and totally real. Others, maybe not. For example, you might write down that you need your phone to be with you when you're leaving the house in case of an emergency. In many cases, totally true. Definitely. But don't forget that when you were growing up, assuming you're not a baby, but most of us when we were growing up didn't have that option because mobile phones didn't exist like they do now. So we left the house without a phone all the time. So, maybe you don't want to drive 20 minutes or go to work without your phone. Valid. But what's stopping you from going for a walk and leaving your phone at home, right? You might make the assumption that you always need to have your watch on because you use it for fitness purposes. Maybe, right? This is how I feel when I see people having resistance about keeping notifications on because they say, oh, well, I do work online. I might need to see something that pops up on social media, or I might need to check my email, when something comes in. Yeah, but do you really? Do you need to be on the ball that closely? Probably not. And I think when you poke at these assumptions, sometimes they're more of excuses with just a shred of truth to them, right? Do you really need your watch on all the time for fitness? Sure, it counts steps, it looks at your heart rate, but once you sort of calibrate to your fitness needs and goals by paying attention to that, you can pretty well gauge whether you're on track or not. You can also just get an old school pedometer, a step counter if that's really important to you. Think about what you gain from having the device with you and what you sacrifice. And again, this doesn't mean you can't ever use it, but do you need it on all the time? I think it's super great that you've been able to make the change to being more present with others and not on your phone. That's a huge leap, and many people find that hard. I also think it's sort of a proof of concept that you can change your behaviors and habits. I want you to reflect on that, the fact that you have been able to change a big habit, and think about what you've gained from that process, how it's impacted your relationships and benefited those around you. All that you're doing now is asking yourself to make a similar change to improve your relationship with your own self. Now back to some tips. We talked about writing everything down and evaluating your assumptions related to phone use. Another thing you can do is try to get very clear about what you do want your phone use to look like, rather than just saying, okay, I'm going to minimize as much as possible. This is a similar approach to if you've ever encountered Ramit Sethi online. He does the I Will Teach You to Be Rich line of products. He talks about conscious spending, a conscious spending plan, not just thinking about, okay, I'm going to cut costs everywhere, just going to try to spend as little as possible. No, you want to spend sometimes mindfully. You want to consciously spend and then minimize ruthlessly in the areas that you don't want to. So in the same way, think about what you do want your phone use to look like. Consider it a conscious phone use plan or something like that. And this might require you to pay attention over a couple days and think about the situations that you're finding yourself in where you want to check your phone or your watch, and the ones that you would prefer to not, right? There are some that you're going to be okay with and you'll be totally fine with. Other ones you would rather do without. So pay attention to that and develop a plan of what you do want your phone use and watch use to look like. Next, you might want to practice putting your phone farther away, literally farther away, like away from your body. If you're in the house and you're doing something like watching a TV show and you really don't want to be, picking up your phone and checking during that process compulsively, try leaving it further. Leave it in the other room. Leave it out of arm's reach. You can keep the sound on if you want to, just in case. A lot of people fear, okay, well, what if somebody calls me and they need me and I can't hear it or something? Turn the volume up, put it in the other room. So you have it on Do Not Disturb or whatever. You're not going to get all these notifications, but if somebody needs you, you'll hear it. And that's an option. So you just don't even have that temptation right next to you. Another trick would be to move around some of your most frequented apps. Like literally move where the icon is on your homepage or whatever. I did this one time. I did an experiment. It was a few years ago where I moved the icon for, I think it was Instagram, whatever my most frequently compulsively checked app was at that time. I moved it and I replaced where that was with a different app. So I took something else and put it in the place that Instagram used to be. And in this case, it was Evernote. It was my notes app that I used at the time. So each time I was standing in line or sitting down and I pulled out my phone and compulsively just went straight to Instagram, instead I realized, I pulled open my brainstorming note. So I would start typing in there and brainstorming instead. So it was kind of like a habit replacement. And I was very surprised by how much it actually happened, how much I just flipped to it without even thinking. And so I tried to brainstorm each time that happened. And at the end of that experiment, I wrote up a little book that I wrote based on my TEDx talk that I did years ago. So it actually had a positive outcome. Having some accountability can also be quite helpful. So letting anybody in your life that sees you often, that cares about you, let them know that you're trying to check your phone less, you're trying to be less tied to your notifications and checking things, and simply ask for their support in whatever way they can. That might be encouraging you, that might be checking in on you and poking you, that might be saying, hey, look, you're doing it again. Anything, right? You don't have to tell them specifically what to do. Just be like, hey, this is a goal of mine. If you could watch out for me, I'd appreciate it. The last thing I'll say is that you may need to find something else to do. One of the points that Jenny makes in her book, the one I mentioned at the beginning of this response, is that you can more easily slow down that flow of digital overconsumption when you become more engaged with real life, when you start doing things outside of your phone more and being more present in those. Maybe this is the time to really challenge yourself and go without your phone for 30 minutes or an hour, whatever you can tolerate, and try to figure out what you enjoy doing on your own. When you're not talking to somebody else or engaged at work, what do you like doing? Find a way to celebrate that time and enjoy it. Enjoy that time spent without your phone, and you won't think of it quite as much as torture. I know I said last thing, but I lied. The actual last thing I'm going to suggest is maybe a little bit silly, but you can be a bit of a brat about it. Like, be insolent. Reject your phone's attempts to control you. These apps and these devices, they're literally designed to be addictive. Like, literally. I'm not just saying that to convince you to come to my side or something. Literally, they are designed scientifically to be addictive. That's how companies and these shareholders make money. They are not your friend, much like Vegas isn't your friend. Maybe it's fun. You can enjoy the products they make and still recognize that they're not there to be your friend. They're there to make fucking money, right? So Be aware of that. And maybe you want to embrace that, right? Take a page out of Rage Against the Machine's book. And every time you feel that temptation to get to your phone, say, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me, right? Act out against your phone. Resist that urge and give your phone the finger. Not today, asshole, right? And I think sometimes posing it in a different way like that, even if it's a little bit silly, can give you a different type of motivation. And it can feel good and fun. So those are my thoughts for you. You are in a great place to start off with this, given that you've already done the work of changing some of your phone-related behaviors. So this is just the next step along that journey. I think that you're probably already starting to make some changes simply because you've asked this question and brought it up as a goal. So I fully believe in you. You got this. So with that, that's the end of the episode, everybody. Take care of yourselves. I really appreciate you listening, and I'll see you for the next one.